You're listening to dialectradio.co.uk, your local community radio run by volunteers. Log on to our website at dialectradio.co.uk to find out more.
My name's Chris Pothecary. Been on the show before. I'm talking about Colombia, and that was about 6 months ago. So I've been in England all of this time. I haven't gone back to Colombia yet, and I thought I'd, come along and today and
it's a good idea.
A little bit more about the developments.
You have, because I understand you're back off to Colombia again soon.
Yes.
Do you miss it?
I do, yeah. I love Colombia. Colombia's a great place and very lively people. And there's a lot to see and a lot to do in Colombia and amazing landscapes.
What is it that you most miss about it when you're back here in Britain?
The countryside. I love the countryside. Colombia's a beautiful country. And there's the area where I live in Colombia is up in the mountains, so it's cloud forest. Amazing, spectacular views, a lot of deep valleys, canyons, a lot of different kinds of wildlife. Then you can go down into the Amazon jungle as well in Colombia. There's deserts in Colombia. You've got the Andes. So it's a very spectacular country with a big range of different kinds of ecosystems. It's actually, for its size, it's the most biodiverse country in the world. Only Brazil is more biodiverse, but Brazil is much bigger. So if you were to do it by size, Colombia would be the most biodiverse country in the world.
It sounds to me like lots of little creepy crawlies and snakes,
oh, yes.
Snakes as well.
Loads. Snakes, insects, lizards, butterflies. It's got the greatest range of butterflies in the world, apparently. Fish as well. There's a huge variety of fish and birds of all kinds of colours and shapes and sizes.
So have you ever had a close encounter with anything a bit nasty out
I've had close encounters with various snakes in Colombia, yes. I was taught by a local woman out there how to actually catch a snake. And so I've actually caught a wild snake and handled it, a poisonous one, which consists of getting a V-shaped stick and catching it behind the head, and then you have to get it and get your thumb on the head and make sure it doesn't get out of your grasp, because then they would probably try and bite you. And I've had very close encounter with a very big snake in the jungle. I don't believe it was a poisonous snake. It was about 3 meters long. I've seen a boa constrictor as well. So, yeah. I mean,
see, they don't need to bite you, do they? They just squeeze you to death.
No, they apparently, yeah. I mean, this was a young boa constrictor, so they wouldn't necessarily go for a human being, I don't think. But, it's amazing to see a creature like that alive and wild in the jungle.
Oh, sounds like the Jungle Book, the old, cartoon from the 60s. Anyway, look, you're heading off there soon, but there's been some quite big developments over the last few weeks in Colombia. That is to say, apparently a peace deal signed between the government and the FARC guerrillas.
Well, they've been negotiating that for the last 6 years, and the present government in Colombia, which is under the presidency of a fellow called Juan Manuel Santos. He is in charge of Colombia at the moment, and his government have been negotiating with the FARC for the past 6 years, and recently they signed, on the same day as the Brexit result in Britain, they signed a kind of a pre-deal, kind of like, okay, that they were going into the last stage of the deal. And now in the last few days I've heard that they've actually signed a deal in which the FARC are now committing to giving their arms in.
But look, just give us an idea of the two sides. The FARC is one side. They're Marxist guerrillas. They're not really part of the government, but they're certainly they have an income from drug dealing and all sorts of other potential ways of making money. And so it's almost like there's two gangs. There's the government gang and the FARC gang. Is that fair to say?
I think as things have developed over time, it's probably become more like that. In my knowledge of the history of Colombia, from speaking to people there and also, reading and just learning about it, living there, the original movement of the guerrilla armies in Colombia was, I think, a very authentic expression that had arisen from a lot of persecution of the people by the ruling classes. The fact that then over time it has become more and more politicised and has been the sort of an expression of Marxist ideology, that's something that's come in over time, I think. But if you go to the grassroots of it and you speak to grassroots people who are there living in the jungles or whatever, and maybe they're affiliated in some way with that organisation, they're not quite so much into ideology. They're much more into what are the basic needs that they have that are not being attended to by the state. So there are genuine grievances and necessities in the people in Colombia that have led to that situation occurring. But, the FARC have over the years become very involved in the drug trade. And that I don't think has done them any good in many ways, because it's, I remember noticing that a lot of the younger people, I lived in an area of Colombia for a while, which was where the FARC were in control. So if you live in an area like that, occasionally you'll see them. They're not visible all of the time, but they've got people who are working for them in all of the villages and so on. So, if anything goes on, they'd know about it.
So, we're talking about a kind of almost like a territory controlled by the FARC. How would you know, for example, if you'd gone from government-controlled area into a FARC area? If you are travelling around in Colombia, you need to know. There's certain zones, and they're called red zones. Now, there are zones, or there were back in the day, zones which are genuinely guerrilla-controlled zones. There were other zones which, if you were to speak to someone in the capital city, in Bogota, a taxi driver or any person on the streets, or even a policeman, they would say, such and such an area is a red zone, don't go there. But that, a lot of the time, would often be propaganda, because it wasn't necessarily the case. Indeed, I went to areas like that and there was nothing at all, and there was no real guerrilla presence there, but it was rumoured to be so, and therefore that kept people away from those areas. I'm not sure what was that was something that would be put out by the government. So would you notice if you were crossing from a government-controlled part of Colombia to a FARC control? Is it, say, for example, at night time or whatever, in a bus, a coach or something, is there a checkpoint, or is it just suddenly you're in a different area?
The areas which have been traditionally FARC-controlled, those areas would be very, very seldom visited by any person that isn't Colombian, for a start. Now, if you go into the areas, the only thing that you would really be able to tell the difference is there's no police stations. There's not really an army presence. Yeah. But on the way, in the particular areas that I knew, right up until an hour away from an area which is FARC controlled, there would be army checkpoints, fortified police stations, because the police stations would have fences round them, barricades, sandbags, a whole installation for protection, as if they were. And often you'd see bullet marks on the walls and so on, where there'd be some kind of skirmish, or if the FARC had gone and attacked them at some point. So then once you were moving away from that area, I always travelled, and it would be advisable in those situations to always travel with a local person who knows the score, because you could find yourself in an area like that, and if you don't know the situation in the country, you wouldn't necessarily know immediately that it was an area that was FARC controlled. But
so you're in a FARC controlled area. Let's just imagine there's no police, there's no army. Does that mean it's lawless?
No, not at all. They are the law in those areas, and they have their own system of justice, or they had, because now they're going to disband. But in those times, and I think, there's a lot of, for example, one area that I travelled to a few years ago was an area in which you needed to have letters of recommendation on your person if you were to travel deep into those areas, because they were areas which were much more sensitive. So you would need to actually make investigations before you travelled in those areas, and to have some kind of backup.
Sounds a bit hairy. But still you want to go back.
Yeah, it's not as hairy as you'd think it is. It sounds it, but I know I speak fluent Spanish, so I know the country very well. I've studied the geography, I've studied the history. I can make myself understood very clearly. So, and I kind of know the nature of the people, and I've picked up a lot of the local words in the dialects. So I can sort of I wouldn't ever pass myself off as Colombian. I'm a little bit too white and tall and things like that. But people over there are very much like, well, if you do pick up all of those kind of things and you'll always be a gringo, and they'll say, he's un gringo, no? But if you if you are able to integrate well with the people and you're you're sociable and so on, people will very quickly warm to you, and it's not necessarily a tremendous difficulty, those things. You just have to have your wits about you. But,
okay, so you're outside of kind of the normal system. Do the where you're living, you have to do all the normal things like have credit card, pay rent, and all that sort of stuff?
Well, I mean, I've been living on a farm in a rural area, so we don't have. There's we do have electricity, although that would tend to go down as soon as there's a storm or anything like that, and would disappear for 3 days or so. So it's quite regular power cuts. Yeah, when you're living in those parts of Colombia, for example, if you bought a piece of land and you've built a house on it and you need to get electricity, the electricity board will send you up a concrete post, and you've got to work out how to put the thing up into the ground. Yeah, so the people are very clever with levers and ropes and all, and they know how to do it. So you get some local people to help you to do it. But the electricity board will only come on and put the wires on once you've got everything ready. So it's quite different to here. I mean, obviously in Colombia they work a system of credit cards. You can go into the villages, and because most people don't get internet in their houses over there, the place is full of internet cafes. So any town will have 10, 15, 20 internet cafes, and that is the way that you get on the internet. Mobile phones in Colombia, because people are always scrimping to get by. It is very normal that virtually in every street, 5, 6, 7 people have got a sign outside the house saying minutes for sale. So if you want to give someone a call and you haven't got a mobile phone with minutes, because a lot of people might have a phone but they won't have the money to buy minutes or to buy a plan. So they can receive calls, but when they need to make a call, they're going to have to go someone who's bought a plan and they're selling minutes.
I do wonder sometimes whether the Brits are missing a trick here, because we all pay for our internet, don't we? A whole street of people individually. Well, actually, if a whole street was to get together, they could have one big fat internet connection and share it between them all.
Indeed.
And I suppose that's the necessity.
And that would be more sociable, because I think in a lot of ways, part of the thing, and I notice it living in Britain again, is that the more that we all have our own access to the internet and with the apps on the phones and everything, the less that we need to interact physically with other people. So, you take out the sociability, and it's actually more difficult to get to know people and to make friends.
Well, we lose our social skills. Oh dear, exactly. Oh dear. I was just thinking the other day actually about the demise of the railways in the 1960s, and less use of the train and more use of the car. That's another way of desocialising people. Yeah. You're not chatting to people on the train. You're sitting in the car most of the time on your own, driving to and from work, spending hours and hours and hours in a little box, maybe listening to the radio.
You see, I mean, I think that one of the things that's really going to happen in Colombia now, and is happening, is that although Colombia's been in this conflict situation, one of the if you like, the plus sides of being in a country like that where things do not function like they do here is that the social fabric and the community sense that there is amongst people is much more alive. And so because out of necessity, and they say that necessity is the mother of invention, necessity also bonds people together, gives them solidarity. For example, I've had situations where they have these buses there called a shiva, which is a lorry basically with wooden seats on the back. And this is used in a lot of the outlying rural areas, and it's the way in which everybody gets to town. And it'll run on market day. So a couple of times a week, everyone piles on the shiva. And they will take down to town their coffee, their beans, whatever it is they're going to sell at market, animals and so on. And it's a social event. Yeah. So travelling to town on market day is a big social event, and everybody's chatting away and so on. Yeah. So you've got that kind of thing there. But one of the things that I can see coming in Colombia now is that with the peace deal, they're bringing in more and more and more all of these things that there are here, where everybody's getting stuck on Facebook, on the mobile phones, there's a breakdown of that. It's fragmenting in a way, that community sense. Yeah.
I mean, because you do sometimes get the impression that people are kind of talking to someone who's almost next to them, but they're talking on Facebook and on their phone and typing things in rather than actually speaking to people face to face quite a lot. Anyway, look, let's just go back to these recent developments and the peace deal. $64,000 question. Is it going to work?
Depends which angle you're looking at it from. What I'd noticed out in Colombia and what's going on, you see, the guarantors of the peace deal are the United Nations. And what is being cranked up big time in Colombia now is that the NGOs are swarming into Colombia. So you've got everything from Médecins Sans Frontières, the Red Cross, and a whole gamut of smaller organisations which are coming into Colombia in order to implement courses in conflict resolution, in order to organise the people into different interest groups, human rights groups, and all of this. Sounds all very nice, but when you actually look at what's really going on is that, and I heard a comment from one of the local person in Colombia, that the UN had organised a conference for farming communities to come along to be kind of told that they've now got human rights. And I heard, one of the guys comment, and it says, if we didn't have any before, what the fact is that, those communities, if you like, indigenous communities, and in their roots, they've also had rights amongst them, because to them life is sacred, and so every life has its right. Yeah. They're being treated a bit as if they're kind of some kind of primitive beings who've never had even a notion of law and rights and all of that kind of thing.
A bit patronising.
And now they're going to be ushered into sort of like the world of the UN with the Declaration of Human Rights and all of that kind of thing.
I mean, is there any hope, do you think, that big organisations like the UN can facilitate rather than lecture to actually help Colombians to set up the country in the way they want?
I think, in all honesty, I don't think that UN is actually formed in order to truly help anybody. I think that they've actually been formed. I mean, I've looked into the UN, and the UN was set up by the Rockefellers, I believe. Certainly the Rockefellers gave the UN its land, and all of the I mean, for example, in Haiti, what have the UN done in Haiti? They brought cholera there.
Yeah, we just had the admission, finally, more than 10 years after the event, that they actually were responsible for the deaths of something like 7,000 Haitians by spreading cholera from their little place there. They're so-called there to help people, but actually they ended up killing 7,000 people at least. So the United Nations need to sort of do a bit of a rain check. They're certainly not very good at admitting when they get things wrong.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, I think there's a big situation for Colombian people now to deal with because of the existence of the guerrillas. One of the effects of the existence of the guerrillas is that it has limited tremendously the possibility for multinationals to get their hands on the abundant raw materials which are in Colombia, including now a lot of names of different kind of minerals that people haven't heard of, which are used in the latest electronic developments. Yeah, so titanium is one. Titanium, I think. There's many different kinds of minerals now which are sought after. Colombia's also got two massive rivers, which there's a whole project to dam those rivers.
Well, it sounds to me almost as if the guerrillas, although they may have laid down their weapons, have they?
They are supposedly going to be giving their weapons to the UN.
Right.
Yeah, that's the deal. And what they're getting in exchange, because when I think the operative word in peace deal is deal. It's a deal. Yeah. So it's obviously a negotiation that's gone on, and a deal has been struck. That we want such and so. If you actually read the different elements of the deal, a lot of them sound very good. And if they are going to be put into, for example, one of the main points of the deal has been how to deal with the problem of the drug trafficking. Because obviously a big element of the situation in Colombia is the drug situation of the cocaine, which is made in Colombia and exported to the United States and to Europe. Yeah. So this has been one of the major elements of the peace deal, is what is going to be done to deal with the situation of the production of cocaine in Colombia, and how is that going to be changed? So, the guerrilla were putting forward the point of view of the rural people in Colombia, of the fact that the reason that people grow coca is because they don't have other viable options for making a living. So obviously you need to substitute what the coca gives with something else. So they're obviously talking about the creation of markets for different kind of products, and ultimately the substitution of the production of coca. Yeah?
What about we're getting to the situation where mineral resources are being exploited in the next few years. Surely there's going to be a temptation, particularly if people are being cleared off their land, etc., to pick those guns up again.
It could well be the case. It all depends. I mean, I think a lot of the thing is in Colombia. I mean, I'm not per se against a peace. I'm very a lot of people in Colombia would be very skeptical about how this is actually going to function. But the people have been living in an internal conflict for more than 60 years. So you imagine if you're living in a place where so many people have been killed. I mean, it's over 1 million people at least have been killed in Colombia. There's 6 million displaced people. I mean, the toll that takes on a population in which if you speak to people in Colombia, nearly everybody's been infected in some way by that conflict. I mean, you want peace, don't you? You don't want to live with the possibility that your son or your daughter's going to turn up dead on the doorstep, or that a family member's going to disappear, or that you're going to lose your home or your land. So it's obviously natural that people are going to want peace. Yeah, but what price are they going to pay for having that peace? This is the question.
Well, at the end of the day, you're right. I mean, the drugs, what happens with the cocaine, the coca, is crucial in all of this. But, I mean, I wonder, is there... Most of that cocaine, of course, is imported into the United States and sold in the United States.
It's all very well... I mean, you could
Are the US serious about giving up that
Well, the thing is
importation
that
of cocaine?
Well, yeah, this is the question, because you can talk... it looks very lovely on paper. And the deal on that aspect, that I was reading through all of the points, and they're all very logical. But the point is that there's a demand for it. And if the demand is there, then somebody is going to supply it. And obviously we also know that the drugs trade is a big economic motor in the world, along with oil and guns.
Well, and also some of the big banks like HSBC have got actually, after the 2008 financial crisis, have gotten into the drugs trade. But anyway, I wonder just, do you think that the Americans are serious about giving up their addiction to cocaine? Because they're the cause of the demand.
I wasn't aware that they had said they were going to. I mean, we know, one story I heard of was a journalist from Los Angeles or San Francisco, one of those places, Gary Webb. Have you heard of him? He was killed, or apparently he killed himself, that is the story, although the investigations on that show that to be a bit dubious. But he had uncovered the CIA involvement in drug running, So there's obviously very, very powerful interests in keeping the drugs moving. And, we know from living in Colombia that although the Plan Colombia that was led up to the peace process, before the peace process, from the time of the Clinton administration, the US has put billions and billions of dollars into the Colombian military and into funding the fumigation of the coca fields. But what had happened in practice is that after all of the years of that, the amount of land used to produce coca is the same as it was before. All that has happened is the areas where it's done has shifted, because they were going into certain areas where the FARC had control, and they were fumigating in those areas. And so what would happen was that then the coca production would spring up in other areas, coincidentally areas that were under control of right-wing forces. So it appeared more to be like a territory war rather than actually a real attempt to stop because, like I say, if there's a demand for it, somebody is going to know that they're going to make some good money from it.
We like to blame the Americans for being the big place where there's a demand for cocaine, but actually, of course, that's not the case. Is equally a massive demand in Europe,
of course,
and many parts of the developed world for this drug. I do think,
and it's also used in Colombia. I mean, in the big cities all over the world now, you go to any big city and there's drugs available, aren't they? So,
I came across this. It's a really good audio book and a physical. Book called 000 by Roberto Saviano. He's actually under 24-hour guard with 3 carabinieri with him. He was a whistleblower from the drugs trade. He was actually, one of the things he says in 000, and the reason he calls it that, the book, the title, is because this is the grade of the highest possible flour used for making pasta in Italy, and it's a kind of code for the very best cocaine.
Okay.
And I mean, he's saying actually that the City of London is the centre for this money laundering and this drugs trade. I mean, it's fairly shocking to some that Britain should actually be in the middle of this. But what do you make of that claim?
Oh, it wouldn't surprise me. I think that it's quite obvious that the whole thing of high finance, for example, the City of London is probably one of the most important financial centres in the world, if not the most important. I was listening to something the other day about the Fire of London and how the Fire of London has something to do with the creation of the City of London, because after the Fire of London, then that was created. So, there's all where you have high finance, you have drugs, you have oil deals going on, you have arms deals going on, because what is it that they're the things that move the money? So where, you've got all of this movement and money going on, it stands to reason that it would be a place where all of that's going on. I wouldn't be at all surprised.
It sounds to me like we haven't quite got a grip on the kind of mafia drug trade yet.
No, well, I think that it's endemic. It's endemic part of the modern world, because the modern world is. I mean, one of the things, for example, that I learned in Colombia, and I find it to be very important, is that, and rather ironic as well, is that the actual plant coca itself, in its natural form, for example, if you want to make 1 gram of cocaine, you need a huge sack of coca leaf, which means to say that in the coca leaf, only a very, very small percentage of the leaf is actually the alkaloid cocaine. Speaking to people out there who know their stuff on this, and people who've used it traditionally because it's medicinal, and it's also known as a sacred plant to indigenous peoples who hold it in very, very high regard, the coca plant. And they say, look, the white man or the Western people, they will isolate from the plant an active ingredient, yeah? And they said, but they don't realise that the passive ingredients of a plant are just as important as the active ones, and that in nature things are in balance. So in the sense, coca's actually got 14 different alkaloids in it, of which cocaine is only one. And those alkaloids in the natural form balance out the things, so that when you use coca, you can use coca to drink tea, coca tea. You can the traditional way that indigenous people use it is they chew it, either fresh or toasted, and that this. What it gives you is it's like a gentle stimulant. It is a very strong cup of coffee is stronger in the way that it affects your nervous system and so on. You don't get the shakes if you chew coca. It gives people a kind of a relaxed, but it keeps them aware, but they're relaxed. Yeah, so it doesn't kind of overstimulate. And it's actually very good for you because it contains different minerals and different vitamins which can be absorbed into the blood whilst you're chewing it.
So are you one of these people that went over to Colombia originally just to get some access to these drugs?
I wouldn't call them drugs myself. I didn't. I went over to study indigenous, to learn about indigenous medicine, because these plants are truly medicinal. Coca leaf, for example, for little children in Colombia, one of the health problems in Colombia that's very common for little children is amoebic dysentery. 3, 4 or 5 coca leaves boiled up in milk will be given to little babies there, and in general in South America, and it cures and gets rid of the parasites. That's one use for it. It fortifies the gums and the teeth. It oxygenates the blood. So, for example, in places like Bolivia, where you have the altiplano, which is often like over 3,500 metres above sea level, it's very common to get lack of oxygen to the brain, which causes altitude sickness.
So this is herbal medicine,
A cup
really?
of coca tea oxygenates the blood because it helps the capillaries in the lungs to open up. So it's not a drug.
It's herbal medicine.
It's not a drug.
What you're describing sounds to me like a kind of herbal medicine,
Yes.
but the drug companies aren't going to make anything selling that to you if you can grow it in your garden.
Well, exactly. And this is, I think, because one of the things that to me was a glaring omission in the deal that they've made on the particular part of the coca is they're talking about substituting the coca, i.e. eradicating the plant. Yeah? But they don't talk about the possibility of allowing people to continue to grow the plant, but just to change its use. Because you can make shampoo. In Bolivia, for example, they've legalized the production of coca bush against the advice of the United Nations, because the United Nations were the ones who made coca illegal in 1954, and the coca leaf is classified as if it was cocaine. Yeah, but coca leaf is not cocaine.
Well,
by any stretch.
one other group of people that rather like these things being made illegal is the mafia, because then they can have a whole massive illegal market in it, and suddenly the profits jump.
The profits jump, exactly, because if it were to be, I mean, cocaine originally was legal. There is the one company in the world that is actually legally allowed to use coca leaf. Can you guess what that one is? Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola are legally allowed to import into the United States a certain number of tons of coca leaf per year, because by law, in order to call the product Coca-Cola, they have to have some derivative of coca in their recipe. I think they only use some kind of extract, but they have to do it by law. So there is an exception made for the Coca-Cola company, and they're allowed to use coca leaf. But the indigenous peoples who have used it for thousands of years without any kind of drug problem, because it's not a drug to them, yeah, they're not allowed to.
So I wonder if any of these Coca-Cola employees are actually cokeheads as well. They're using some of this cocaine, refined cocaine.
Oh, I'm sure they're not.
Anyway, Chris Pothecary, I wish you a very safe trip back, and hopefully we'll have you back when you're back in the UK, or maybe we could even have a chat to you on Skype if you're able to do that sort of thing from one of your internet cafes.
Yeah, well, it'd be good to keep abreast of what goes on there, and I think it's going to be a very interesting time in Colombia.
I just wonder if you've got anywhere you point people online to get news about Colombia, because we just simply don't get it a lot of the time online.
Well, I'm actually working at the moment on some articles to start up a blog, and the blog is going to be with the address Beyond the Frontier at WordPress.com. So I've set up the blog. I haven't actually published anything on it yet, but I'm going to be doing so in the next week or so.
Well,
so
we'll keep track of your
activities. I think the
on
idea is to use that as a way, and I've been in contact with various other sort of people in alternative media, so I'm hoping to be able to set something up and to be able to sort of like communicate regularly from there and keep people up to date with what's going on in Colombia.
Okay, Chris Pothecary, thanks very much for joining us again on Dialect.
Thanks very much, Tony.
That's all for this week. Dialects Bristol's first weekly MP3 podcast. If you're online, you can subscribe to our emails or download the podcast from dialectradio.co.uk. Thanks to our guests, Chris Pothecary, talking about Colombia, and Fran Anderson from reinvestigate911.org. Also to studio engineer Dave Pazanko. Dialects a Bristol Broadband Co-op production. Catch us on Bristol Community FM 93.2 every Tuesday at noon. And anyone can contribute. Contact us through the People's Republic of Stokes Croft, just off Jamaica Street, on prsc.org.uk. Also via Volunteering Bristol on 0117 989 7733. That's one word, volunteerbristol.org.uk, or the national volunteering website, that's do-it.org. That was Dialect, and I'm Tony Gosling, wishing you a very good week. Thanks for listening. Till the same time next week, goodbye for now.